Good morning. I'm Dr. Tagge, founder of Tagge Precision Health, where we focus on optimizing health, not just treating disease. Today, like to talk a little bit about optimal ranges and why they're important. The health optimization model we use is built on a definition of health, that health is the absence of disease plus the balance of anabolic and catabolic pathways in the body according to where you are in the life cycle. There's a method where we measure, we compare to optimal ranges, and we balance. Today, I want to talk about the comparison loop where we compare to optimal. The model also is founded on 7 multi-omic sciences. They are metabolomics, which is the measuring, evolutionary medicine, where we contextualize human health in evolution, chronobiology, the effects of light on our system, exposomics, our environment, mitochondrial bioenergetics, the synthetic and energy hub of our cells, epigenetics, how our genes are turned on and off. Our genes are not our destiny. They're the keys on the piano, and our lifestyle and molecules are the epigenome playing those keys. And what we really care about is the music or the metabolome, where we measure clinical metabolomics. And the last pillar was the gut immune system, our postnatal organ, the microbiota that is responsible for many of the metabolites, probably a majority of them, that's making it into our body and blood and doing additional signaling downstream from even the food that we eat. So today we're going to focus on optimal ranges and the importance of those. And this is quite timely. Where we are now is that there's a whole host of people out there who could feel better than they are feeling, but they are not necessarily getting the information that they need to from their healthcare providers. And the reason is that they present for care and usually they will list some symptoms. And this person will hopefully compassionately listen to them. And then usually the first thing that they do is get some labs. Now, we could be thinking about a little bit more of an in-depth history for this person, what's going on in their day-to-day life that could be contributing to this. And a lot of times you can probably solve the problem there. But labs are a great starting point. The issue with labs is that oftentimes the look that's done is very cursory. It's very superficial. They get, basic labs. The most common ones are probably a complete blood count, a complete metabolic profile, a lipid panel, and an A1C. Sometimes people will have TSHs and vitamin Ds and those kinds of things added on to those. And for most people, especially nowadays who are using consumer digital health tools like Function Health and other companies, Superpower, and there's more accessibility for this blood work now. And the tests that people are getting are deeper. The issue is that most of the time these things come back normal unless there's really something out of range and is a problem. And then you're kind of already into a space of we have a disease. And we are trying to go upstream from this. We want to detect problems before we diagnose problems. Or sorry, we want to detect imbalances before we diagnose problems. And so the importance becomes is who are you comparing your values to? And so, if standard reference ranges are built and change over time based upon the health of the population, you're comparing yourself to population averages. And if you look around right now in the United States, do we want to be comparing ourselves to the average human in the United States who, at this point in time, we know is probably metabolically unwell by some strict definitions? Potentially 70, 80, 90% of people have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction. And so if you're using that population as your average and you're saying you're normal based upon labs that are falling at average to a sicker population, we may be missing the mark here. And so that's where the optimal ranges come into play and where comparing yourself to a healthy cohort is important. And we can look at individual biomarkers and have this conversation potentially about almost every single one of them. But common ones, would be things like nutrient levels, B12 and others, TSH, vitamin D. Those are probably a couple of the easier ones to explain. So TSH, for example, the normal range usually runs about 1 to 4. That's actually a four-fold difference. A level of a TSH of 4 is 4 times that of 1. So that whole spectrum is normal. And then you can look at the downstream hormones as well. But nowadays, people that are practicing optimal range medicine, look for TSHs that are closer to 1 instead of 4, especially as it relates to metabolism, energy function. This represents how much more thyroid hormone your brain is asking for compared to the feedback loop that it's getting from the body. Another one is vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is there's been billions of dollars spent trying to come up with research studies to see if vitamin D can actually solve a medical problem. And so far, that research is falling quite short. But we know that vitamin D is a master regulatory hormone that changes the gene expression of many, 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 many genes. Obviously, we make this from sunlight. You cannot put sunlight in a pill, but you can optimize your vitamin D levels with pharmacology. You still should get some sun because it's so much more important for your hormones and neurotransmitters and nitric oxide and all of the other things that sunlight's doing for us. But when we ask the question is, what is an optimal vitamin D level? Well, start with people that are less than 7 or severely deficient, and that should be replaced aggressively immediately. Now, the question is well, normal range, they start to flag normal in the 20s. That's still low. And well, how do we know this? Well, with vitamin D, we can look to evolution, right? We don't have to think too hard about this one. We can ask, is there a population of human beings that are running the same hardware as you and I are right now that are living in a more natural environment? And there are tribes that have stayed true essentially and avoided the modernity that we have with indoor lighting and houses, and they live outside and they still live very much in context of an evolutionary approach to being a human being. Their levels of vitamin D run 60 to 100. So we for vitamin D we can use evolutionary derived values to understand for human health what's an optimal range for that metabolite for our physiology. And so that could suggested to be a marker for people to make sure that they are optimizing their health and getting the right signal for their biology. And that will fluctuate based upon your latitude, a whole host of other things in your physiology and metabolism. Last one I want to chat about briefly is B12. B12 has a massive range and it is critical for many, many, many reactions. B12, when it's low, can lead to neurodegeneration, spinal cord, and cognitive issues. And low, seriously low, is less than 100. However, normal range will flag at just around 200 something. Now, that range goes all the way up to, I think, 1,000 and even 1,500. And so you can see that such a large range can allow people to fall somewhere on this spectrum, and who knows whether or not their B12 is insufficient for them or not from a level of 200 to 1,000. So optimal range practitioners want these levels higher. And for B12, it's not necessarily a specific blood level we're targeting, but what we really should be targeting is a functional B12 level. We can use metabolites of a pathway that we know substance A becomes substance B, and there's an enzyme that catalyzes that reaction that uses B12. Based upon the ratio of those substances, we can understand how active that enzyme is and how much functional B12 is currently being consumed and used. And we can use those to optimize those levels to make sure those reactions are not limited by B12. The last point I want to make here is, how do we define optimal ranges? Well, a few brilliant people have looked at this and they have decided that what may make sense is to compare ourselves to a younger, healthier population. And so the suggestion is that for hormones, for example, testosterone levels, estrogen levels, we can target some percentile of a 21 to 30-year-old where our hormones are at peak physiology and function. So let's say, for example, we have a 25-year-old male whose peak physical health and his testosterone level is 100. Now, what should a 50-year-old or 60-year-old or someone be shooting for if they want an optimal level of testosterone? The suggestion is not 100% of that level. We don't want to necessarily shoot for 1,000. That will be a very strong anabolic response to the body for a long period of time and could lead to issues. But the suggestion is 50 to 75 percentile could be considered an optimal range for these folks. So that would be a level of, let's say, 500 to 750. Now, if you have a client who's, at that age and is in the 200s and 300s and they want to optimize muscle mass, energy, libido, some of these kinds of things, testosterone is the hormone that makes effort feel good. That one continues to ring true for me. Then replacing testosterone to those not super physiologic levels, but what we're defining here as optimal range values could be a great approach to helping someone improve their health. And in the big picture, what we're really going for here at Health optimization medicine is. The status quo is that we're all getting older, a process called geriatrization. Geriatrics, older folks, we are all getting older. We're all geriatrizing. Now, we want to slow the rate of this aging, and we are doing that through slowing the pace of inflammation, as these things are very strongly associated, if not causative. But in health optimization medicine, instead of geriatrization, what we're looking for is something called metabolic neotenization. So, metabolic means the metabolic networks of the cell. We want to make those things younger. We want to make them appear as if they are the networks of a 21 to 30-year-old, and we're shooting for 50 to 75 percentile of that range. It is called metabolic neotenization. And the neotenization is from the word neoteny, to make younger. So metabolic neotenization. This has been a short video on optimal range physiology. If you like more, please consider subscribing, watching, booking a call. I'd love to help you optimize your health and not just treat disease. Thanks for watching.